Namaste, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Siddharth, and I am part of the Climate Risk and Finance Council. I will be part of this proceedings as a narrator, Sutradhar, for this. So, as immediately what we will do is I will introduce Mr. Srinivas Rella Rao, who will in turn introduce what Climate Risk and Finance Council is, what we stand for. And then he will briefly introduce the moderator and the panelists for this evening with us today. After the panelist discussion, we will have a brief question answer session where we will request our participants to kindly post their questions in the chat box, where myself and Mr. Rao will take care of it. And towards the end of the question answer session, we will have a vote of thanks again from myself. So without further ado, please, let's start with this. Sir, could you kindly start? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Siddharth. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you all for joining today's panel discussion. Myself, Srinivas Rella. I'm a risk professional with 24 years of experience in BFSI segment, and I'm one of the board of directors in CRFC, Climate Risk and Finance Council. In today's session, we are going to discuss on the outcome of COP27, what succeeded, what failed, and what is next on climate risk. The Conference of Parties is an annual climate conference hosted by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It is an international environmental treaty adopted and implemented by countries throughout the world in 1994. Mainly to address the issues of the climate change. First, let me introduce CRFC and the panel members. CRFC stands for Climate Risk and Finance Council. It is a network of practitioners from the fields of finance, business, sustainability, research, data, and technology across the globe. CRFC aims to be the knowledge platform to manage the climate-related financial risk. Our mission is to provide thought leadership in perceiving climate risk and its impact on the financial institutions. And the second one is we want to compile and develop resources for climate change mitigation and adaptation. Also, we want to develop philosophical foundation and practical tools to implement climate-related financial risk in financial institutions. Towards this, we have been conducting webinars, panel discussions since last 1.5 years. We thought discussing on the COP27 outcome is very relevant and required by all the stakeholders. For today's panel discussion, we have an eminent panel, Dr. Seema Misra, an environment and sustainability professional. Currently, she is working as a director in SIES, Indian Institute of Environment Management, in Navi Mumbai. Madam, thanks for accepting our invitation and welcome to the session. Now, the second panelist is Lavanya Prakash Jaina. He is a thought leader in climate finance, sustainability, ESG, sustainable finance. Lavanya is working as a climate finance advisor at Commonwealth Secretariat. Prior to this, he was actually working at Climate Policy Initiative, New Delhi. He participated in the COP27 deliberations in person. Who else can be better suited for this discussion other than Lavanya? Welcome, Lavanya, for this panel discussion. Next panelist is Hargovind Sachdev, a professional banker with 39 years of experience in Indian public sector banks, and now he's playing the role of independent directors for a few other companies. He's also one of the board of directors in CRFC. Mr. R.K. Anand, a chief economist and worked in BFSI segment for nearly 4 decades. He's also a visiting faculty for IIMs. He's also one of the board of directors for CRFC. For today's session, David Cole, he's going to play the role of a moderator. He's a data management leader and currently working in First Bank USA. He's also one of the board of directors for CRFC. Without losing much time, I will hand over the session to David. David, over to you.
Thank you, Rella. Welcome, everyone. We are very happy to have you today and this evening. Hopefully, this will be a very informative session. I'll repeat some of the things Rella covered just to make sure everybody knows our purpose. Obviously, COP27. It's a lot easier to say that than the Conference of Parties of the United Nations Convention on Climate Change. So I'm glad they have a simple acronym. That did take place recently in November in Egypt. And let's just start with kind of what the vision of the president of that group and the whole convention was about, was moving from talking about it to doing something about it, from negotiations and planning to actually implementing and doing something to combat climate change. And you're here today and this evening primarily because you have an interest in doing something about climate change. And our panel, and we're going to get right into that, is that's what they're here to do also. If we hit the goals one more time about COP27, finally, just there's 4 themes primarily: mitigation, adaptation, how do you finance it, and then how do we work together and the collaboration thereof. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. One of the significant things that did come out of the recent conference was an agreement to focus and build and structure a loss and damage fund. And again, I think this is primarily recognizing that there's need to pay for some of the things that have happened that are related, presumably, to climate change. And how do we go about, paying for that and sharing the load and the burden across countries and individuals. So as we go into our discussions today, we'll talk about loss and damage funding. How do we pay for things? We'll talk about nature-based solutions to fight climate change. The U.S. Committed $25 billion to kind of try to help in that particular area, and we'll talk a little bit about that perhaps. And then what are the bank's role, the financial institutions' role in achieving COP27 objectives? And really, what is the bank's role in climate risk management? How do we use our risk management expertise and integrate climate change? So without any further comment, I'd like to turn to our panelists and start asking some questions. I'm going to begin with Lavanya. We thank you for being here. And just kind of starting out, I'd like you to kind of elaborate a little bit on the Loss and Damage Fund, why the fund is relevant today, and perhaps share a little bit about your experience at COP27, what you learned, and just the atmosphere, et cetera. So at that, Lavanya, let's hear from you.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Rella, for inviting me to this webinar. And it's really interesting to see that the people from academic, from banking, from corporate joining this webinar. Yeah, coming back to my experience, it's a very good experience actually to meet people from different disciplines, from different geographies, because mostly I was interacting with people coming from small island countries. They have their own set of problems in climate change. Mostly they're focusing on climate adaptation. And their definition of climate finance is completely different. The kind of finance discussion we do here in India or in the United States and Europe. Mostly they're talking about climate adaptation, because these are the countries which are very, very vulnerable to climate change. So that's the reason we're discussing about the loss and damage facility or fund. Fortunately, the loss and damage facility finally agreed at COP27. It is a very long and hard-fought win, particularly for the small and vulnerable countries, because these countries are going to spend a significant amount of money for climate adaptation. And climate change events have already started hitting these countries very fiercely. So when we're talking about climate change events, it could be events like hurricane, flood, heat waves, increase in temperature, sea level rise. All these events are climate-induced events, basically. Although this loss and damage fund, it started back in 1991 by Vanuatu. So, this country waited for 32 years, 31 years actually, in fact, to realize the happening or the setting of the fund and agreed at COP. But actually it started getting momentum at each COP to COPs, but it really didn't materialize. Hopefully the fund will set up very, very quickly. And the beneficiary countries will be, again, small island countries, like countries based in Pacific regions, countries based in Pacific island or Caribbean island. They will be the beneficiaries of this agreement. But more importantly, it's important now because the last couple of years we have seen a number of climate-induced events. For example, flood events in Pakistan also, they lost 30 to 40 billion dollar. Flood events in Nigeria and China, and there is also fire, forestry fire in Australia or United States. Although they should be blamed for that, it's not the developing country who should be blamed for the loss and damage. So we are also seeing extreme heat waves in South Asia region for last couple of years because of climate change also. So recently, a researcher from Yale, they have come out with an estimate that because of climate change, the amount of loss and damage because of climate change was $1 billion. And somebody who has come out with a research that it is affecting close to 200 million people every year because of climate-induced events. And it has started affecting the global economic output, particularly the developing countries' economic output. The reason is that they are not able to cope with climate change. They have to invest further amount in climate adaptation. At the same time, they have to recover from their climate-induced events because it is disrupting their economy. S&P recently come out, they said that it may wipe out the global GDP by 4%. So that we can understand that what is the impact of climate change. But loss and damage is more related to vulnerable countries. It's not going to help the countries like India, which is a little better than least developed countries, the small island states, because they need to invest heavy amount of money. They are much more vulnerable to climate change events like countries like India. So because of recent weather events, there is this loss and damage. It's gained momentum in recent times, and I'm good to see that at least it was agreed in this COP.
That's great feedback and just insight into what happened there. I want to kind of take the critic position for just a second and think that, okay, we're talking about how to help countries that can't afford to help themselves. And that's a very noble thing to do. I think we recognize we need to do that, and other countries can come together. So as a global community, but that's not enough, clearly. And it's great that we're talking about that, but that doesn't really do anything to help climate problems. What comes next? And so what is the response to, hey, we're focusing on just one thing and not the big thing? How would you respond, or what do you think the participants thought about that?
Okay, sometimes I feel that it's also a distraction because there are several mechanisms under UNFCCC. There are several funds have already been created, like Climate Adaptation Fund, Green Climate Fund, Global Environmental Facilities. And all these funds and mechanisms, their primary role is to help developing countries in climate actions. But unfortunately, the amount of capital promised or committed by the developed countries at COP, they really didn't meet their commitment. For example, they promised that we will provide $100 billion per year so that that can help you in achieving your climate action, both climate mitigation and climate adaptation. But unfortunately, that amount has not arrived yet to developing countries. If I see the number, recently OECD came out with a number close to $81 billion or so for climate actions. But unfortunately, that is also contested whether that is really climate finance support or just private investment. Because the developing countries are saying when you are talking about financial support, the capital should be free, it should be grant money. It's not like equity capital or private capital, which comes at a commercial rate. It's a business as usual finance we are getting. How are you helping us? That's also challenging the definition of climate finance. Then the other side, if we see that most of the capital is flowing to climate mitigation, because when we are talking about climate mitigation, it is about you are reducing carbon emission from your business economic activities. Reducing carbon emission is a global public good. It's helping everybody. For example, if India is reducing carbon emission, it's helping everyone, starting from India to UK to Germany to United States. So most of the capital is flowing to that because these businesses are commercially feasible and all the foreign investors, they can make money out of that. That's the reason. But more importantly, climate adaptation, because the developing countries are vulnerable. They don't have that fiscal power to invest heavily in climate adaptation. So money is not coming to this kind of sectors, which is also challenging. Then we have created another loss and damage facility. Basically, you are admitting that when climate-induced events are going to happen, and you are going to pay for that. And there will be no investment going to happen on climate adaptation, which are going to reduce loss and damage. So nothing is going to happen. You are admitting that. So it's a big question also because all these things are not. There is no logical correlation between mitigation, adaptation, then there is loss and damage funds. So let's see how it looks like.
Makes perfect sense. So we really want to hear a little bit more from you before we go to the other panelists. And you were there previously. You saw the participants clearly. There's people from all over the world, government officials, scientists, experts. Talk a little bit about the private sector, other participants that are engaged both from a funding and an involvement perspective. Would like to hear a little bit about what's just the climate of the people there and what they were thinking and saying.
Okay, so last time we see heavy presence of private sectors, large COP at Glasgow, and several banks, car manufacturing companies, airlines. They have placed that, okay, we'll achieve net zero in the future, sometime in 2040, 50, 60. I'm not sure whether this company would survive that long. That one, many companies would be bankrupt by that time. There is a possibility. And the chief executive officer, the top leadership who are managing these companies, by that time they would have retired or so. So still they are claiming that, okay, we are going to achieve. So that's questionable. Around close to 2,000 public companies, actually publicly listed companies, they have made a commitment of net zero at Glasgow. Similarly, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, I'm managing $11 trillion of capital. I said that, okay, it's important for all the companies to transform their business to green, to net zero. It's important for them. It makes economic sense as well. Otherwise, BlackRock is going to withdraw their capital from those companies. So they have written a letter to all the top leaders. But unfortunately, that kind of momentum lost actually at this COP, unfortunately. I don't know what exactly happened because the civil society have started scrutinizing the results of net zero ambitions, particularly from the financial sector. If you see, the financial companies are still financing coal, oil, and gas assets. At the same time, they are claiming that, okay, we'll achieve net zero by 2035 or 2040. It doesn't make sense. If you keep on adding more investment in the carbon intensive sector and your incremental investment in clean energy is not much, not that much, it means that you are not giving a positive signal or very encouraging signal to the society that you really intend to achieve net zero, or this is a PR exercise. So right. I didn't see any active participation of private sector at COP 27. They were completely missing actually. Even in the newspaper, I cannot see a lot of declaration about net zero or reducing carbon emission by 80% or so in next couple of decades. So that is very different from the earlier COP. We understand that the presence of private sector is very, very critical. Their role is important because the amount of capital required to decarbonize or achieve net zero, it's not the government or the public sector we can raise that much of amount of capital. It's only the private sector who can do that. But if they are conspicuously absent, so it's a big question mark about their participation in this green transition journey.
Very, very helpful and very insightful. It kind of may speak to the human condition of, I think we all recognize that for the common good, we want to do the right thing. But we have to survive and make a living, and businesses are in the business of making money. capital flows to where there's the greatest return opportunity, but also there's risk reward. And you would think in this space, that's really where the opportunity will present itself. But you also see waves that move back and forth over the years. And I think climate has had one of those. It's very hot topic, no pun intended, and then it can be cold. And perhaps that's kind of what we're up against here. But thank you for your insight. We will return to you, and I'm sure some of the listeners would be interested in asking you some questions maybe later on. But I think I want to give the other panelists opportunity to speak to a few things. Dr. Seema, I'm going to call on you next. And I think this may be an opportunity for you to weave in the real world challenges of climate change, how they are really affecting our environment and or agriculture and other such things. But one of the topics that was covered at the conference had to do with nature-based solutions. And I know the U.S. Commitment, also the $25 billion commitment that they made, was based on this nature-based solutions. As I read through that, that actually sounds very good. It makes a lot of sense, seems very practical, and would like to hear from you regarding what is the potential of nature-based solutions in climate change adaptation. Dr. Seema.
Thanks, David. Nature-based solutions are gaining a lot of momentum since COP25 in Glasgow. And before that, in 2016, IUCN has actually emphasized that nature-based solutions should be the part of climate change policy framework, because nature plays a very important role in providing resilience to the environment. As you all know that when we talk about nature-based solutions, means all the sustainable areas of environment that should be the part of climate change policy. So in current perspective, in COP27 also, emphasis was laid on reducing the deforestation, improving the coastal management, as well as on regenerative agriculture. As you know that agriculture and food commodities play a very important role. So in COP27, emphasis was laid on regenerative agriculture also, because food commodities should be part of the nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions, further framework is already developed by IUCN, but its implementation is required in policy framework, in all the regulations, as well as climate finance should be also part of the nature-based solution. I think then its implementation will be done effectively by all the policy at the government level, as well as at the industry level, and also at the grassroots level, because all players will play a very effective role in its implementation for climate change adaptation. And adaptation is very important in developing country. Mitigation is already being done a lot in India. Focus is there, but adaptation is also very important. Although our country is less vulnerable, but yes, adaptation will definitely play a very important role, because our country is monsoon based, and periodically we face a lot of challenges of drought or flood, and for that actually it's very important to give resilience to farmers. So that mechanism is required, and I think for that climate finance and implementation of nature-based solutions will be a very important tool.
Got it. Would you elaborate for a layman like myself a little bit more practical application of a nature-based solution in agriculture? What exactly does it look like? Give me an example.
Yes, so in the nature-based solution basically includes the use of less mechanization, use of less chemical inputs, and application of more biological and biological as well as natural aspects like low tillage. And there should not be any disturbance in soil, means deep plowing should not be there. Apart from that, the emphasis on natural regeneration of soil to improve the fertility should be implemented. Apart from that, this is the supply chain in agriculture. But when we produce a commodity, it's very important that we should focus on the local products more in comparison to regional or international products. So in that way, we could assure more sustainability in agriculture, as well as we can promote nature-based solutions.
That's helpful. And I was just thinking from a practical perspective, it might start with each person individually, what you're doing, how you're consuming food, what kind of food you're purchasing. It starts local. If we think about this as an international challenge and problem, but each one of us probably could find, a local produce stand or grow our own vegetables, perhaps. And in some cases, it may not be practical if you live in, very populated cities and others. But the focus there is, where are you buying your things from? That it follow the money. And then secondly, I think is, look, if you're in the business of farming and agriculture, you're yet again, it's to make money, and you want to make money and provide a service. But how can you do it in an economically or environmentally friendly manner? And so we've got the concepts. How do we incent and educate to make that transition? So I think those are some of the challenges. And again, who does that? How's that changed? I believe it starts local. And then another follow-up question, kind of in a similar way, the technologies of new agricultural methodologies that simply are better for the environment, but they're also more creative and innovative for using technology that increases productivity of agriculture, but also reduces the carbon footprint. Any thoughts on that from you in general, or the takeaways that the listeners can get from that?
Yes, definitely. When we talk about technology in agriculture, it's very important that it should be site specific, because if we talk about our country, it's very diverse, and site wise, a lot of variations are there. Even if you go in one district, you will find 2-3 different type of soil. So as per the soil, as per the inherent conditions, the type of technology also varies. So it's very important that we should first we should develop lab-based technology, and then we should implement it, and we should conduct several on-site trials for several years, and then we should promote. And most important aspect is the involvement of local stakeholders, means agriculture department, then block level officials, farmers, and farmers should also be the part of trial for several years, so that they will be aware what should be the adaptation measures and what should be the mitigation measures. And they should also be aware about the policies in case if there is a drought, or if there is a rainfall is not proper, but it's changing the pattern, then how to adapt. So it means if they have to change the nursery raising pattern, or they have to change the transplantation duration, or if they have to change the harvesting dates, then they should have that proper knowledge. So we are working here in Nashik with the onion growers for last 10 years, and we have observed that slowly farmers are gaining this knowledge about adaptation. And in Kharif season, that is monsoon season, and that onion crop is very important because it is harvested during October, and it bridges the gap between demand and supply from October to December. So farmers are now very clever, and they know that how they have to manipulate the dates as per the humidity condition, temperature. And our government is also supporting them very nicely by providing them day by day information on the changes in temperature, changes in humidity, when they have to go for irrigation, what type of fertilization will be useful for them. If humidity is high, temperature is also low, in that case, there may be pest infestation. In that case, what type of pesticide they should use. And apart from that, when they purchase their seed, along with that, they get biofertilizers. So that is the very good thing that is farmers know that how to apply, how to use, how to change, how to manipulate. So apart from biological methods, they also know that drip irrigation is very important. Mm-hmm. That will support in minimizing the requirement of watering, as well as it will also reduce the losses. So for these type of technologies, it's very important that climate finance should support it, because farmers are basically marginal or low level, so they require this type of financial tools. So I think climate finance is going to be a very important area in current scenario to support in regenerative agriculture for farming community in our country.
Great response. And as I thought it through and listened to what you were saying, technology is an enabler. Information helps the farmer. The innovation is leveraging the intelligence that we have, and then there's opportunity for training and education. So all those things bring together a set of tools that we all should have a great interest in. And then again, how do you pay for it? And I think the trick there is to connect the need and the opportunity to the reality. So we all agree that climate is going to change. We can't change it. We have to innovate, we have to overcome, we have to adapt. And I think those themes have kind of resonated through here. And on the adaptation phase, you start where you are, and then you need help sometimes. And I think that's really kind of what you addressed. It's getting everybody involved to do their part and improve the system, if you will, for everybody. But it keeps making me think back to how do we finance it? But more importantly, what kind of jobs and opportunities may come out of this? So listeners may have family, friends, or direct interest. Talk to me just any other thoughts you have on the job opportunities that are being created from the climate change and our response and adaptation to it.
So very good question, David. And since last 13 years, I'm teaching at PG level in different programs related to sustainability and environment management. And we have observed that in last 13 years, this sustainability market has developed a lot. Earlier, there was more demand in pollution control and management. Slowly, it was environmental impact assessment. Then sustainability professional, demand of sustainability professional started. And slowly, CSR, and now ESG. In last 3 years, we have observed that ESG is a very fast moving area, and they require a lot of trained professionals. So our MSc students or PG diploma students in sustainable environment management, they are getting a lot of good opportunities in different consultancies, in industries, and they are supporting in mainstreaming different areas of environment, social, as well as economy in the ESG framework. And they are trained in different frameworks also. Apart from GRI standards, they are also trained in CDP, they are trained in TCFD, and they are also using all the tools when they are going into the industry. So now this area is booming a lot in our country, and I am very happy to inform you all that a sustainability manager or ESG heads or even partners in different consultancy are our students. So we feel proud of that. And if we talk about grassroots level, like farming community, so they are also actually in agriculture department level, now climate change experts are also there. And their main role is to coordinate with the Indian Meteorological Department, Agriculture Department, then Water Department, and to find out and devise best strategy for farmers and to inform them daily so that they can use the best pattern for their agricultural activities. So there also the role of voluntary organizations is also gaining a lot of momentum in our country. Basically, they are using technology as a tool. So I'm very happy that now through WhatsApp chats or through Telegrams, a lot of groups are there and they are taking benefit, not only in one district, but they have a state groups also. So government is supporting them a lot. So yes, in future also, I think farmers will be able to adopt all these technologies very wisely and use it.
Very good. Very good. Again, great response. What I was thinking is, we all know somebody. What is our role that we could play individually, corporately, as a community, group, or nation, and then individually, again, as we need to make a living. Each one of us has a job, and where might we work? What can we do to be part of this? And it can be almost anywhere in that stack of disciplines, but whatever it is, we're all interconnected. And one of those connections is certainly the banking and finance side. And I'll use this as an opportunity to kind of shift to our next panelist to hear from Bhargavan a little bit about his perspective on the objectives of COP27, specifically as it pertains to bankers, those of us in the financial services business. And you can kind of address it specific to, COP27 and then beyond, impact for India, US, the world, basically, because we're all trying to fight this same battle. But I'd love to hear from you, Bhargavan, on your perspective.
Thank you, David, for the opportunity given. On behalf of CRFC, I would like to first express my gratitude to each one of the members who have joined today with large audience listening to this. I want to say that world is progressing by leaps and bounds technologically, but it is becoming poorer day by day ecologically. Now, that correlation has to be balanced, because ecologically, if we fail, then there is no use of technology for our future generations. It is a fact that this Mother Earth has been given to us in trust just to live our lives and pass it on to our children. See, banking depends on 4 pillars, that is honesty, integrity, truth, and trust. If you lead your banking life in an honest way, you retire honestly. If you help people to whatever commitments you have made, your integrity is rated high. And truth is that banks are meant to address to the problems which are contemporary. And if you really address those problems, you become trustworthy. If you take this example to Earth, Mother Earth, today you find that it is crying for help. And that is the spirit which COP27 captured about Earth. Even though there were less numbers of players this time offering economic sustenance, but still banks have to be now very, very focused. There are 3 aspects which impact the role play of banks in maintenance of ecology and observing what COP27 actually contemplates for a good world to live in. Now, first thing is that banks themselves are becoming extremely polluting. The number of, paper sheets they use for statements, the number of, deserted computers, printers all around, and floppies and all sort of stuff, which, branches all over India or all over the world, they are throwing without disposing them properly, are also creating one problem. Second thing is they're financing industries which, are creating a lot of, problem in ecology, like the coal industry, the oil industry. And the third is that because of these, a lot of their assets, they lose their, resilience and the power to service the loans. And the NPAs become and the profit levels of banks go down. So there is, a total circle wherein the Climate Risk Finance Council is also, deeply thinking and involved to somehow see that the funding is directed towards the mitigation of climate risk as far as possible. At our forums, we are also advising banks to enhance their paid-up capital and keep a portion of it to mitigate the climate risks which arise, out of nowhere. We just saw Corona, the COVID-19 impact, which was also an indirect, climatic disaster for the world. And it still continues to hold the world into its grip, where China is still not come out, and entire supply chain all over the world has been disrupted. So the focus of the COP27 has been very well understood by banks, because they now know that private players, they only want to have higher returns on their investments. So they are away from this social cause. And it is the responsibility of banks now to make the fight and take the fight to logical conclusion.
Well, it's a very great perspective that you have. Appreciate that. And I think just recognizing that we're all in it together. From a banker's perspective, I'll speak from, my bank as a mid-sized bank in, the U.S. We really are not focused on climate risk yet. It's on the radar as a blip. But we are always looking for opportunities to make a difference in our communities, and making the connection from where we are and what we're doing to the larger global perspective. Act local, think global is kind of the theme. But you need to make sure you connect your actions that you benefit your stakeholders locally, but also the macro stakeholders at the same time. And there's always a balance and a trick. And one of the additional things that we're focused on have to do with, obviously risk management practices in general. And we typically see all the normal risks that you encounter in banking: liquidity risk, credit risk, market risk, et cetera. Climate risk doesn't typically come into the equation. So help me think through a little bit about how do you integrate the climate risk into the risk management domain, and how do you bring it into risk management practices?
Yeah, very well said, sir. Actually, in India, the credit rating agencies, they are already taking into account the ESG compliance of various corporates before rating them. Some of the banks, lead banks like State Bank of India, Bank of Baroda, have also started giving a 0 mark to a non-compliant unit as far as the pollution control permissions are concerned. But not much, as you rightly said, even in US, not much has been done, because the banks are still more focused on profitability. If you kindly look back into the contours of the Egyptian meet which just happened, COP27, or into the Paris Agreement, the worst fears of the world, intelligentsia are coming true. We thought that we'll only increase the temperature of to 1.5 degree by 2030, but it looks that this may happen within 3 or 4 years now. So time is running out. As such, banks have to evolve a rating rationale where they have to gatekeep the lending practices, wherein such polluting units do not come at all. They do not come at all, but at the same time, we have to extract and divert funding towards units which mitigate this disaster and which go for greener technologies, because the growth also has to sustain, to generate profits, to undo the harm which has to be done. So banks have a very, very important role. And as you rightly said, it is time that each bank, while lending, should do a rating which should incorporate this concept of climate risk and give marks for that, so that it proves as a deterrent to the spoilers of the climate.
Very, very well said, and a good perspective on things. I still struggle with how do I integrate it into my risk management practices. Basel IV coming up in a couple of years and other requirements. I think what we'll see is regulators, to your point, will push the issue that what are you doing, bank, regarding this, and how are you integrating it? How are you accounting for it? How does it affect your lending decisions, et cetera? So what advice might you give for bankers, financiers, et cetera, preparing for that day? Obviously, you can't put your head in the sand. You can't put your, hands over your ears and over your eyes and pretend it's not happening. To your point, it's happening. It's happening fast. So, what are some practical steps that we should be taking to kind of get ready and get going to integrate this into our risk management framework?
David, the opportunities are writ large. See, now some of my branches, they are doing 100 cars per week, most of them diesel cars and petrol cars. Now, EV cars have come. If my bank decides to focus on lending only EV cars or reduces rate of interest, reduces margin money required by the owner of the car, then obviously the shift would be towards such less polluting vehicles. No, starting with that, I have recently funded one company which is manufacturing filters. Now, those filters can be installed on the top of a car, like the taxi board in London. Now, those filters go around the city and whatever air passes through them, they purify. Now, this may not benefit directly the owner of the car, but then if such a machine, such a filter is put on top of buses, trucks, scooters, and wherever possible, or it is made mandatory by the governments, then, whatever effluents are coming in the, earth, they can partly get, purified, and the world will become a very good place to live. So the opportunities, as you said, are there, but we have to focus on that through a missionary zeal. And unless we do that, we will not be able to leave a good word for the generations to come.
I like your perspective. And so it begins with education, awareness, and then action. It boils down to those things. You have to understand the problem, accept that there's something that can be done, and then find your point of action, whatever it might be. Back to my banker hat, that might be, my job is to make money for the institution, but my job also is serving my community. And my larger job as a human, to your point, is to be a good citizen of the planet. So how do you integrate all those things is really the challenge that we're all facing. Very great insight, Bhargavan. We'll probably come back to your perspective again as we get to discussions from the audience. I think we'll shift and hear from RK Anand. You've got a lot of experience in banking, et cetera, also. I'd like to hear your perspective on banks' climate risk management practices, perhaps your integrated framework for credit and investment, and how that compares versus climate risk, and speak to a little bit about allocation of capital to these problems. Again, money's going to go after the opportunity based on risk and reward. So we'd love to hear from you, Mr. Anand.
Thank you, David, and thank you other fellow panelists who have given their valuable thoughts. And my many, many sincere thanks to the audience today to our CRFC webinar. David, I come back to your question and regarding this integration and allocation of capital. Going by the hands-on experience in the past, in the application of economics in the field of finance and navigating the path for the risk management, I foresee, now guided by the views of these experts on the environment, Jana and Madam Mishra, they set the perspective on this climate change happening, and my banking senior Dr. Satdev, he talked on this. What I see is that seriously and very genuinely there is a need now to take stock of the things, but not to be scared at the same time. Since a very, very positive shift is being turning, if I combine three things, like I foresee the climate monitoring and the data and the predictions coming to be fairly very accurate these days in advance to us. And we are in a position to safeguard the damages, against the damages in the field of agriculture or other fields like that. Similarly, there is a fast growing concern about the emission reductions, second aspect, and the again, the reforestation and the sea level rising and the global warming, etc. And third is now the COP27, a clear shift on directly on the funds and the finance, climate finance, rather maybe somewhat ignoring the very strong declarations on the stronger emission reduction and the fossil fuel phasing out. Bearing that, but I'm happy to see the focus on finance now. Now, coming to the lenders and the banks, I think that if the focus is like the money makes the mayor go, is now the focus is on funds and finance. I think all this single penny is going to be channelized through the banks only. And now what is expected of the banks is that there is a need for us now to firm up our business plan, recast our business plan, see how the business is going to be impacted by the climate change. So I need to recast my business plan. I have to go the sectorally or the industrially, earmarking some red flags, green flags on the type of the assets we create. This is my business plan. Second is, if simultaneously in the integration process, because the integration risk management I have found to be the very best and the auto-driven of the institutions, those who have performed IRM, the integrated risk management means the business plan is integrated with the risk management. There I mean that at the same time, the risk management being made an integral part of this IRM. By what I mean, to elaborate this, like say, now the recognition and identification of this element climate risk is very clearly on the surface. And there is a very nice framework and very flexible framework. The Basel started with only two groups of the risks, the credit risk and the market risk. And it took them a time to bring operational risk into the fore. And it took banks about a 5 years period to understand the definition of operational risk, what to talk of provide for anything. Now come the fourth group, which is there, the blueprint is ready. The fourth group is climate risk, which is clearly seen now, a group to be added into this framework. Now, as a proactive institution, as a bank, if I become the first bank to factor in this fourth group of the risk in my risk management, and I integrate this into my business plan, I think I'm doing the integrated current business management as well as the risk management. So that is what I mean by this.
Makes sense. And I'm really trying to boil this back down to what do I do as a banker? And so obviously it's recognizing that this is a type of risk or a factor that has to be integrated into my risk framework. If I've got a Basel framework, it is something that's got to be brought in. It's got to be part of my investment decisions, but it needs to be part of almost every decision that we're making. And how it's integrated in ultimately is yet again, back to some of our earlier comments, an individual decision, how it impacts your local market, and then how it impacts the global market. In regard to investing and placement of capital, I have two choices. I could invest in an oil company that's drilling, or I could invest in a solar company or some other kind of sustainable energy. I have two choices. It's a risk and reward, and I need to make decisions. So now there's also risk in each one of those. So there's investment decision risk management that has to be decided. And then there's the obvious one is preparing for environmental happenings. So we've talked earlier about hurricanes or tsunamis, or in where I live, it's tornadoes. So you can't control those things, but you can mitigate and plan for. And again, that has to be integrated into an overall risk management framework. So we've been managing these type things as bankers for hundreds of years, if not more. But now this factor of climate has become much more important. And again, it's allocation of scarce resources. And as an experienced banker, just kind of speak to a little bit about that, the challenge between following the money and doing the right thing, and how that balance shows up in the risk management framework.
Right. In this, what I see, I give you a very simple, small example and draw a parallel to that. In India, the regulator of the banks brings a report, the financial stability report, where they flag certain risks which are emerging. Like the regulators worldwide, I also see they are seized of the systemic risk they talk about, contagion risk they talk about. So this climate risk, something cosmic risk coming across and impacting all the banks together at one time, or a systemic risk, whatever group you form now, the climate risk, is the risk which is something bigger than the systemic risk. It's going to be universally impacting, maybe differently the different geographies. Now here I see that we bankers need to have a vision first. Finance will come later and take a backseat. These visionary eyes have to open first for navigation, that what change is going to be in the cash flows of my bank, and similarly for my client. One. Second, if there is a change foreseen in these cash flows, then definitely my change in ALM is very set before me. I know that my asset liability management is going to be changed in terms of the liquidity as well as the, the duration thereof. I recall you the history, we should not forget. And this climate risk is nothing new for us if we go into the backdrop of implementing the Basel realistically, because I have done this work on soil. What happens? In early 90s, the ALM came for the banks, and we, 4 or 5 big banks, we were not having a data bank for the ALM. At that time, 20% data was available and 80% was the extrapolation of the data to manage ALM, because this so smart computer network was not available. And a lot of things were happening manually, and computers were just put to make the balances or the, telling the books of the banks, not put to some other uses like advanced use. We are doing this. Now, I'm very optimistic that if I am able to foresee the changes in my ALM, definitely, according to that, I will go and rewrite the book of my RWAs. Regulator may take time, but I am the lender, I am the player. I can develop my own best practice of change in the RWAs, which is going to be for my assets. And I come up with a revised list of the RWAs, now the redefined RWAs. Now, once I reach this way in a humble and a very small scale in the beginning, I am able to write a new amount for the capital adequacy required by me to run my business. Then becomes the choice whether I go, ignore this, follow this meticulously. One. Second, what merit me more as a board of the bank? Whether I prefer this size to be increased or strength to be increased. A very beautiful, the classical example. And the answer is always very simple. Small is beautiful, but it should be, strength should be, which should get the first seat. So in this size versus the strength be given the priority, change RWAs be seen, and the ALM book be rewritten. That's how I'll allocate the capital to the new set of the business. Last thing I would add to this, the last one thing, all this has to be put in black and white in my credit policy and in my investment policy, because from there I'm going to deploy the money belonging to the depositors and not putting them to the risk. So this is the way I foresee for the climate risk management for the banks going forward?
It's very insightful and spoken from someone who has a lot of experience as a practitioner. So I really appreciate your insight. As I was thinking through what you were saying, ultimately this just comes down to doing the right thing and being prepared for any potential contingencies, and making decisions and living with them, integrating those decisions into your various ways of running a business, running a bank. I think about some of the challenges in building a probability of default models or loss given default models and the fundamentals of banking. How do I now bring in this new variable or variables related to climate risk? That's really where the pragmatic practitioners, the people on this call and others have to figure that out. Right. There's no simple answer unless somebody has an answer. I wish you'd give it, but it's a lot of basic building blocks. It's integrating into existing frameworks and being mindful that we're going to continually have to tweak this and refine it as we go forward. And once we learn more, and you mentioned data happens to be my area of expertise and specialty. And, I'm not sure how to start there. What do we capture? How do we capture it? How do we integrate it in and make sense of it? That's really also an opportunity for collaboration. And I think that was actually one of the takeaways from the COP27 is, coming up with ways to better measure, manage, and monitor at a macro level, but more specifically at the micro level. So at that, I'll let you kind of comment in general on those topics.
Right.
And I was going to kind of maybe see you at this point in time. We've kind of been rambling on. If there's questions that have been compiled from the audience, we could start letting them get more involved and shoot them back to our panelists, and the time remaining, kind of take some of those.
So yes, if we are done with the panelists, then maybe we could start the question and sessions then. So we have some questions from the chat window here.
Siddharth,
so
your voice is really muffled. We can't even hear you.
When Lavanya was online. So the question is from Amandeep Singh. It says, would all companies agree to the contribution? Is it any better now? Any better?
Any better? I think I heard the question was all companies. I think you need to repeat the question.
Maybe I can do that. So Lavanya, what Amardeep Singh, what he's asking is, would all the companies agree to contribute for the contribution to be made for this loss and damage fund, right? Especially in the US, EU, China, whether all the corporates are ready to do that? That is the question he's asking.
Is it any better now?
No, not really actually. So although there is an agreement that we are going to set up the fund, so they are meeting again in March 2023. So to formalize the fund, so there will be mechanism also. Definitely, when there is an agreement, it means that there is a consensus between all the countries. Otherwise, it's not agreed. So they will contribute. The important question is that how much they will contribute. For example, United States would have contributed $40 billion to GCF, but suddenly they withdrew after providing only $2 billion of capital. So that's the bigger question.
Okay. Related to that question, I think one more question has come. The Caribbean islands are also expecting India and China to contribute to in loss and damage funds. What is your view on that? The Caribbean islands, yes.
No, it's not only Caribbean island. Even the United States also is asking countries like, particularly China, because they are the largest emitter of carbon emission, they should pay, and they are no more a developing country, because but China's it's depending that according to classification of United Nations, I am still a developing country, so I should be a recipient of climate and loss damage, so not a giver. But there is no question for India because still India is a lower middle income country, not really a developed country. So the capital will flow from developed country to developing country, not from developing to developing. So that's not the point. Since China at some point of time, initially also China denied to provide climate finance because they defended that we are also a developing country, but China contributed. So it is also expected. But surprisingly, China laid this climate and loss damage actually. They brought all together 77 countries which demanded to set up this fund. It's China which said that. But at the same time, the developed countries are asking China to provide. But anyway, that will happen, definitely happen. China is going to provide because it's also a political issue for them. They will, but countries like India, whose per capita income is less than $3,000, you cannot expect that that India is going to provide anything. At least India will not commit. So, for example, India is anyway supporting the least developed countries or small island countries in several climate actions. For example, they set up the International Solar Alliance and the CDRI, Climate Disaster Resilience Coalition. So they have set up these kind of institutions. The objective is to help least developed countries and small island states to do the climate actions, to take necessary climate actions. So India is doing that, but I'm not sure that India is going to contribute any capital to this fund.
Okay, that helps me. That helps. Dr. Seema, madam, I have a question. I'm a postgraduate in agriculture, I think, to start with my career. So you have mentioned about the zero tillage, organic farming, and even no mechanization. It is going to impact the productivity and the production of the food grains, right? Is it not going to impact the entire world regarding the food shortage if we actually go for that?
Yes, so it's very important to actually maintain a balance. Extensive mechanization and extensive inputs, chemical inputs actually are harmful because they remain in the food chain. So it's very important that mechanization, like we are using multiple crops in a year. So we have to actually leave our land as a fallow land for some time. And then we should go for next season cropping. So in that way, actually, we can give a chance to soil for self-replenishment. So that is our actually traditional wisdom in our country. It was the normal practice. Apart from that, when we shift from chemical intensive agriculture to organic, it's very important that this process should be very slow, so that there will not be any fluctuation in productivity as well as destruction in soil fertility. It's very important. So it should be a slow process, and intensive, extensive aspects should be controlled in a sustainable manner.
Okay, got it.
Otherwise, the situation of Sri Lanka, we all know that.
Yes. Okay. So I have one more question, I think, to my bankers friends. So now we know that the Basel IV is coming in, and there is, I think, stringent timelines we need to adopt by 2023 or 24, depending upon the jurisdictions. But we have not seen any guidelines as far as the climate risk is concerned. Neither how do we identify or how do we actually measure, how do we actually incorporate it? Absolutely, there is no guidelines, except some guidelines are coming from the EU jurisdiction, mainly on the taxonomy and all those things. So what is your expectation, I think, when the regulators, the major regulators, are going to react for this, both, I think, India and even US? Any timelines you have in mind? Either Anand sir or Hargovind sir.
Sir,
because unless the guidelines comes, I think no bank is going to be proactively adopting this, because it's a charge on the capital, which is.
Sir, as for the funding or the fund creation from the taxonomy goes, we in India have a regulation that a company has to contribute 2% of the net profit towards the CSR. This is a regulatory aspect, and the taxation compliance has to be given for that. Now, as Dr. Seema began in the beginning, say the environment has moved from CSR to ESG. So this S of CSR is factored into ESG. So what as a visionary or a planner I see that 1/3 of 2% at least can be a contribution towards the E, environment. And the rest 2/3 of the 2% can continue to be in the kitty of CSR, although we are not asking anything so far for the G, because G is to be penalized. There are penalties for the G. So 1/3 of the net profit to be contributed by the corporates towards the environment saving fund to be built up. And governance there be penalties on the carbon contribution by them. So decarbonizing company gets the benefit and the carbonizing company gets the penalty. This is how this regulatory environment we have to evolve. And unfortunately, right now today, there is no institution who has to take a call on this. So we are working in silos in the administration. So I remember the great person, Dr. Damodaran, in one of the conferences I had with him, a very stalwart of the corporate world and corporate governance I regard him. He said that whenever we need a solution, we get an organization. And that comes forward laying the path. So we need today an organization in a country who takes care of this ESG factor as a whole and what is to be done as a contribution towards the fund building towards that. This 2% of CSR, I clearly see certain organizations wasting in distribution of blankets, providing food on the street someday, going one fine day, spending something, in a funny way. So at least this portion, if it goes systematically a contribution towards saving environment, I'm very happy to see it really.
Okay.
So coming to your query about the preparation of Indian banks vis-a-vis Basel IV requirements, I would be very happy to share with you that in last September itself, the Reserve Bank of India has floated an approach paper, and most of the major banks, they are now acquiring additional equity through various type of bonds, including green bonds, which they would incorporate in their capital structure and enhance their equity to mitigate the climate risk perspective in times to come. So even though the response is slow, the preparations are silently on. And as you know, India has always been compliant to various guidelines of various this Switzerland-based compliances authority made compulsory for banks. So we are geared up.
Okay, that sounds good. So Amandeep Singh, you have few questions. I think if you want to ask, you can unmute and you can ask. Amandeep Singh. Okay, maybe he's unmute. Siddharth, over to you. Maybe I think we are almost 1.5 hours.
Closer to it. Okay. Am I audible now?
Yes, now you are audible.
Okay.
Yes.
So yes, I'm sorry for that technical problem there. So yes, there were a couple of other questions. So let me just ask these quickly enough. So one of the questions again was, is India successful in heading climate risk among the sectors of the economy? Have we done, I mean, see, insofar as that we see, we haven't seen anything path-breaking in the Indian economy that can dramatically change the climate risk. But from people from within the banking community, has anyone noticed anything in terms of India heading for the being ready for climate risk, other than the regulatory part?
Yeah. May I take this question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Taking the reference to the recent COP27, there is a declaration of Shunya policy by India, in which India has pledged to make the mobility sector as zero carbon emission by converting the mobility sector to the electric or some other fuel rather than the carbon-based fuels. One. Second is, India seriously has now declared and being pursuing the production of single-use plastic. And there is a serious concern for that. And each and every person in the country is impacted because they have to change their habits of using the very easily and throwing the single-use plastics. So I think the country is seized of the matters. These two things I'm highlighting. The rest, there are a series of the things, small things to begin with, but I think we can take the cognizance of them later in the interest of time.
Okay. I do have some... please. Yes, go on, sir.
By Indian car manufacturers in EV segment. And in-house technologies have been harnessed. And then, with due respect to Mahatma Gandhi ji, our father of nation, who always wanted that people should move toward villages, but the reverse happened. And we could not provide the facilities for them to, sustain a good life in the crowded cities. A lot of emphasis is happening. Like now, headquarters of various banks have to be outside the major metropolitan cities. Now, such initiatives are coming up. They are not permitting, opening of polluting industries within NCR. A large amount of awareness has come where small baby steps, they are ultimately going to make India, certainly zero carbon. The government says it will be by 2070, but steps are already on.
Okay. Certainly, we do have some differences of opinion in that front, but certainly I think we can take those conversations over email or something. Thank you again for this time today. So allow me to just conclude this session. So once again, thank you so much everybody for joining us. Thank you, Mr. Cole, for conducting a very tight session. Thank you for that. Thank you so much again for the panelists who have joined us, who have taken the time and the effort. There was some background work that we had to do before we could prepare ourselves for this. So thank you so much for your time during the last few days. So again, Mr. Labanya, Dr. Seema Mishra, Mr. Hargobind Singh Sachdev, Mr. R.K. Anand, thank you so much for your time and your insights for this session today. And everybody, participants who have joined us this evening, thank you so much for taking the time off on a Saturday. And please do write to us if you have any questions that we have been unable to answer today. So kindly do send us your emails, and then we will ask some of these panelists to respond to it then. So once again, thank you so much. And may I ask our technical team to kindly conclude the session then. Thank you so much, everybody.